Hello, Internet peoples. My name is Guy, and today I'm going to build a RESTful service using Node.js, Express, and RediSearch to help us find Bigfoot and determine if the truth really is out there or not. Join me. With me, Guy Royce.
Right in the corner.
Okay, so we're going to do Bigfoot stuff again. If you followed my previous episode on loading data, you can see here I've got the code up from there. And here we're using the CSV parser and loading CSV data, using the file system, all that stuff. And we're going to run this again because, I threw away the data and I want to load it back in. But I was reviewing this and I realized that there's two bugs and I wanted to point them out in it before we went any further. The first bug is that this right here should be a P and not a R. I want to do HSET on the pipeline, not on the connection. Now this worked fine on a nice quick local connection, so it wasn't that big of a deal, and I was able to load my data, but that's a mistake. The other thing that I think is a little bit better is to call quit instead of disconnect. Quit tells the server, the Redis server, that we are quitting our connection and make sure that it cleans up the connection as well. If you just disconnect, you could disconnect before the pipeline is finished executing, but also the server might not be aware of that closure. And if you did that in a tight loop, you could run out of connections. So these are just two little things that we're going to do to clean that up. The thing you'll notice here also is that I have a little shell script that's sitting in this file project. And that shell script is it's just a little shell script around Docker to start up Redis exactly the way I want it started up. So here we're just doing a Docker image pool, Redis labs / Redis mod. Redis mod's a Docker image. It's got lots of modules from Redis in it. So it's got like Redis Search, and it's got Redis AI, and it's got Redis Gears and Redis Bloom, and all the really cool ones in there. And so that just pulls the latest version. Then we run it, and we just map our port to port. And then we map what's the /data folder inside of that to an external folder so that we could save our contents off the disk. We just shove that in the present working directory /Redis. And then we say, here's our Docker image name. And then we explicitly load the one module we want to use. We want to use Redis Search, so that's what that does. And then we tell it, store your data in /directory, which is what we mapped up here. So this is a really simple little script that I use a lot to start up Redis instances for this kind of work. So let's go ahead and start up Redis. You can see it's pulling the latest. There was nothing new there. And it's running. Let me open up another tab here just to show that. Oh, looks like I got one open already there. We'll run the Redis CLI just to show that it is working. Here we do key star, never do key star. And we'll see that we have a nice blank empty version of Redis. So let's go ahead and exit out of that. And then we'll go ahead and let's close this superfluous third terminal. Okay, so we've got a Redis instance going. We need to get our latest, make sure we're using the correct version of Node. Now we're using 15.8. That's the version I have in the Node, the NVMRC file right here. And we're ready to load the data. So we call npm load, run load. That will run the load.js and will populate our Bigfoot sightings. Now our local instance is loaded. Let's go ahead and run Redis CLI. And if we do keys star, we'll see there's a lot more keys there. So I've been using the Redis CLI, but I think I'm going to use Redis Insight today instead. I think Redis Insight's kind of cool. And we have Redis Insight right here. And if we refresh this, we can see that we get a little browser here, and it's showing us keys. And here's a bunch of sightings, right? Let's see what sighting 1081 is. Doesn't have a date. Someone was bow hunting, sitting there, Stan, and Bigfoot walked about 75 yards away. That's in Washington County in Minnesota. Sounds legit. Another one down here, 51902. And this was in 2016, so relatively recently. Riding a quad runner over in Oxford, Webster area in the woods. This is in Worcester, Massachusetts. Excellent. So we definitely have data in here. So, well, we've got data. That's a good place to start. But we need to actually expose this as a RESTful service. And I mentioned that we're going to use Express to do that. So let's go ahead and install that. npm install Express -- save. We've already got IO Redis installed because We've done that before. It looks like it didn't actually add anything because my package.json had it in there already, I think. But anyhow, here is now Express. And what we can do is we can create a new file here called server.js, and we'll start a little new Express instance. Now, what I like to do with Express is I like to create sort of a hello page at the root that says, I am this service and I'm running on this version. And there's really fairly easy way to do that. Because Node Package Manager exposes environment variables of the name and version of your project that you can use them. So I just use those. So let's go ahead and do that in our server.js. So let's get an Express app going first. So we'll say import Express from Express. That gives us Express. And then we'll say let app equal new Express and app.use, I always type user, express.json. And this tells Express, take JavaScript objects and convert them to JSON, because we're building a RESTful API and we're just going to return JSON. We're not going to do XML or anything old school like that. And then we need an app.get. And so at root, we want to get request and response. We've got our little callback function here. And we just want this to send a simple JSON object. And we want the name to equal process.environment.npm. Oh, I always have to look this up for the exact command. I have a little cheat sheet over here, so I'm gonna use my cheat sheet. npm package name, and here we've got version, and that's equal to process.environment.npm package version. So that's a pretty simple little trick there. So that's going to send a little JSON response with a name and a version if we go to the root of the thing. We got one more thing that we need to do, and that is actually start up our server here. So we'll say app.listen, and then we need a port number. Let's just do port 80 for now. And then we have a little function that's going to run when that starts up, port 80, not port 90. We'll just say console.log, Bigfoot is listening on port. Let's not use let's not hard code the port number in there. Let's use interpolation, some string interpolation here. Make this a little bit better. Let's be professional programmers here and do a good job. So we'll call this port. And then up here, we'll do const port equals 80. And so that's a little more robust. And then this needs another parenthesis there. And in fact, let's be even more professional. Let's take this port 80 and let's put it in a config object so that we could look at environment variables for the port and default it to a meaningful value instead of just hard coding it here in this file. That way, when we bundle this thing up someday as a microservice, we can just make that a configuration option of what port it listens to. So before we do that, let's just make sure this works. So let's do an npm start. It starts automatically. I didn't have to configure it because I chose server.js. And if I select a new tab here, I should be able to go to localhost port 80. I guess that's the default. I can just go to localhost. And here we got name and version. So Bigfoot data service. Let me embiggen that a bit for everyone. And a version of 1.00. So easy peasy. So let's create that config object. So I'm going to create a new file called config.js. And I'm going to say const config equals an object that we return. And then that object will have our port in it, and it'll eventually have our Redis URL in it. And we might even put our name and our version in there. That wouldn't be terrible. So we'll say export default config. And we'll put in here port 80. Actually do port process.environment.npm Bigfoot data service port. And then if that is undefined or null, using the nullish coalescing operator, we will turn it into 80. Now we'll go to server.js and we'll bring in import config from /config.js. And now we can say, in here, we can say config.port. And config.port. So we've externalized that setting, that dependency. We can get rid of this setting here. And, you know, we could probably even do the same thing in here. We could say config. Let's move the package name and the version into config as well. That way, if we change our mind on how we want to handle that stuff, we can do that as well. So we'll add a name. We'll call it service name. Is that, and service version is copy pasta for the lose, for the loss. We'll go in npm package version. There we go. So service name, service version, and these we're just going to assume are present. We won't give them any default values. And then there's our port. And now in server.js, we can say name is equal to config.servicename and version equal to config.serviceversion. I'm a little happier with that. I think that's a little cleaner. So let's go ahead and kill the server and start it back up and just make sure that I haven't broken anything. Command and Shift R. And indeed, we are still getting the Bigfoot data service back. Excellent. So we've got my happy little bare bones express server happening here. So we want to expose some URLs to help us find Bigfoot. Bigfoot sightings specifically. We want to look through all those fun Bigfoot sightings. And we want to get them by, well, let's take a look at some of the fields we have. If we look at, whoa, that's big. There we go. If we look at, say, sighting 24379 or 738, it's got a date, it's got an observed. The observed is a great text. We could use RediSearch to do text searching. That would be really cool. We've got a county, a location, which is geocoded. So we could do geocoded searches. We could look by classification if we want. There's the ID. Obviously, we want to be able to look these up by ID. Probably want to do text searches on the title and the location details as well. And we've got a state. So let's do ID first, because that's hands down the easiest. It's not using RediSearch at all. It'll just use Redis. We're just going to get this key and return the values. So if we want to say app.get, and we want to say sightings, because this will be our little API here we're defining. And then we want to do that by ID. And we got our request and our response. And we got our little arrow function. And I already know that this is going to need to be asynchronous. So let's put the async on there. And for now, we can just say response.send request.parameters .id. That will just return our ID back if we were to hit this URL right now. That's not really, what we want. What we really need to do is we need to talk to Redis. And so we need to get a connection to Redis open, and then we need to call hgetAll to get that particular ID with the sightings URL. And we could just put that right in here, and I'm going to do that initially. But what we're going to do immediately after that, or almost immediately after that, is we're going to take it out of here and we're going to put it into its own class, a data access object, so that I'm going to call it our presentation logic, but it's our public stuff. It's the stuff for everyone else to consume. I always kind of think of apps as having three layers. There's like our stuff, their stuff, and the glass. And the our stuff is our concerns, our problem domain. The glass is the interface presented to the calling program, whatever that is. That might be a human, that might be another program. And their stuff is the way stuff's represented in the database. So by putting my database calls directly in my client code, that's a bad habit. And so those should be separated. But for something really simple, you can justify it. And right now it's really simple and it doesn't justify the refactor yet. So we're going to do that right now. So let's go ahead and import Redis. Import Redis from IO Redis. And then we've got our app here. Let's get a connection. Say let I'm gonna call it connection this time. I called it R before. We'll call it R. R's fine. Let R equal new Redis. And I want to specify a URL instead of just taking the default. Because again, we need to configure this. It does not always want to talk to local Redis, so we'll specify that URL. This code doesn't exist yet, so this is going to break. But this will get us the Redis connection. In here, we'll say redis.hgetAll, and then we need to get something that matches the pattern sightings, colon, and then the ID. And we need to not return that. Let's just set it to a variable. We'll just inline it. It'll be fine. So request.params.id. And then this is going to be an async await thing, so we need to await that. So this will call Redis, do an hgetAll for the key sightings, colon, whatever number you type in. And it's going to do that asynchronously, and then it's going to send the results that it gets from Redis straight back over the wire. Let's go ahead and make our config.redis URL a real thing. And then we'll run this and see if it works. Redis URL, and we're going to set that to Bigfoot data service URL, Redis URL. And if we don't have one of those, we're going to default that to Redis //localhost port 6379 database 0. So there's our config. Here's our connection to that database. Here we are using that. Let's go ahead and say run this. I've got an error. Where's my error here? Cannot read property Bigfoot data service Redis URL of undefined. I must have a typo in my config here. Yeah, I do. Process.env. There we go. Let's try that again. It says it's listening on Bigfoot is listening on port 80. We'll go to lolhost over here. That's still working. Let's look up a sighting / let's find an ID. You can see I've done a few here already. 1, 2, 3, 4. That did not work. And what did I do wrong here? In server.js, it's sightings. I want it to be sighting. So let's go ahead and we're looking for a single sighting, not multiple sightings. And there we go. That did not return anything. Why not? Let's take a look at it here. Let's go ahead and extract that. We'll say let sighting equal await redis.hgetAll sightings. I made the same typo as I did before. This is a slightly better, a little cleaner anyhow. So let's go ahead and run that again. There we go. So sighting 1, 2, 3, 4 happened in September the 15th of 1970. So that was quite a while ago, well over 50 years ago. And it was in Clayton County, Iowa. Cool. You can see clearly it's working. And that's a pretty straightforward process. But again, I mentioned that this is the wrong abstraction, right? We've got our Redis connection right here in the sort of the UI. It's in the front. It's right in the front with everything else. And so I'm going to pull it apart. So let's do a new file here, and we'll call this Bigfoot data.js. And we're going to create a class called Bigfoot data. Actually, let's call it sightings data. I think that would be a better name. We'll call it sightings data. And we'll create a class called sightings data. And we're going to take what's in our server.js here and get it into sightings instead. So we want to get a connection in here instead. And that would normally happen in the constructor. However, I happen to know that I'm going to need to do some asynchronous stuff. So I'm going to skip ahead a little bit here. Creating the connection is not a synchronous operation, but I'm going to have to at some point use RediSearch and initialize some indexes, and those will be asynchronous operations. And so I'm going to go ahead and just put it in a little init function now. We can see here that I'm using Redis. So import Redis from IO Redis. I'm also using my config. So import config from /config.js. And that gets our connection. Let's go back to our server here. And let's go ahead and say find by ID. Let's create a function, find by ID. You pass in the ID. And it's basically just going to do that. That is also asynchronous. So this is just going to be, straight up return. We don't even need to assign that to an intermediate variable. There we go. Init find by ID. Go back to server now. We don't want to do this. We want to say citing data dot find by ID. And we can inline that pretty easily. Oh, wait. Just like that. And now all this thing knows how to do is call another layer and turn the results into JSON. That's all it does. The citing.data doesn't exist, so I do need to create that. So say let citing data equal new citing data. And I need to import that. So import citing data from /citing data.js. And there's our constructor. We no longer need the Redis URL. We do need to say citing data.init. And I think I'm missing something here. Yes, I did not export this, so I need to say export default citing data. So init, find by ID. Server is ready to use that. Let's go ahead and see if this works. It didn't blow up. That's always a good first sign. Let's go ahead and reload this. That blew up. Let's see what I did wrong here. Reference ID is not found. That is correct. It is not found. It is request.params.id. Yeah, okay, so I didn't update my connection name. This should be this.connection. Request is not defined. It would not be. I totally inverted it. It's like, yeah, hey, the ID goes over here and the request.params ID goes over here. Let's try that again. And here we are getting that result again. So we've successfully extracted a sightings data helper class, or, well, it's a data access object. So this is pretty good. Howdy everyone, Future Guy here. When we recorded this, it went a bit long and we've decided to split this video into two parts. You've just watched part one, where I talk about setting up Express and Redis and get a simple route set up and wired to Redis. But our quest for finding Bigfoot is not over. I'm going to add RediSearch and a whole bunch of interesting routes to the application in part two. So like, subscribe, do all those things that we always ask you to do so that you can see the exciting conclusion to finding Bigfoot RESTfully. And see you in the next video.